Humanity's elite were unleashed. The stars trembled once more. Part 5. The Stars Trembled director Samuel Park delivered the intelligence briefing with his usual calm demeanor. His voice did not waver as he explained that the Keth had activated something called the Extinction Protocol. His hands did not shake as he displayed images of the weapon being transported to a launch facility near the Keth throne world. The weapon was designed to destroy planets. It would be aimed at Earth. The estimated time until deployment was 72 hours. Nathan Cole absorbed the information in silence. Around him, the senior officers of the Vanguard displayed varying degrees of controlled alarm. They had prepared for many scenarios over the past 3 centuries. This had always been one of them. Admiral Patricia Lane appeared on the communication screen. Her orders were simple. The Vanguard was authorized for unrestricted engagement. All protocols limiting their actions were suspended. They were to stop the Extinction Protocol by any means necessary. Nathan asked for clarification. He wanted to confirm that Admiral Lane was authorizing what he thought she was authorizing. Patricia met his eyes through the screen. She said that the Keth had chosen to threaten the existence of humanity. In response, humanity would demonstrate exactly why. Threatening them had been a catastrophic mistake. She gave Nathan full authority to do whatever was necessary. The Vanguard fleet assembled at coordinates outside the Keth home system. 200 warships that had been fighting across 12 star systems converged into a single overwhelming force. But they were not alone. Ships began arriving that Maya Torres had never seen before. Vessels emerged from hidden bases that even most Vanguard veterans did not know existed. Ancient warships that predated galactic contact powered up systems that had been dormant for centuries. Maya watched the fleet grow with something approaching awe. She asked Nathan how many ships humanity actually had. Nathan did not answer directly. He told her that during the unification conflict, humanity had built weapons that they hoped would never be used again. They had hidden them so thoroughly that even their own government did not know the full extent of what existed. Today, everything was being revealed. The Keth had prepared for the human assault. Supreme Overlord Kethmer had gathered every available warship to defend the throne world. Over 2,000 vessels formed a defensive shell around the planet. Ground-based weapons platforms added their firepower to the orbital defenses. It was the largest concentration of military force the Dominion had ever assembled. Kethmer believed it was more than sufficient to stop any attack. The human fleet arrived. For a moment, both sides simply observed each other. The Keth saw an enemy fleet that was still outnumbered. They saw ships that looked old and outdated. They saw what appeared to be a desperate last stand. Then Nathan Cole transmitted a single message to the Keth commander. He explained that humanity had spent 300 years hoping this day would never come. They had hidden their capabilities because they wanted to be peaceful. They had pretended to be weak because they valued cooperation over conquest. That pretense was over. The battle began. Maya Torres had witnessed the fight at Proxima. She had thought she understood what the Vanguard was capable of. She had been wrong. The full might of humanity's elite descended on the Keth defenses like a force of nature. Ships moved with impossible coordination. Their psychic link, creating a single unified consciousness, spread across hundreds of vessels. Weapons that had been developed during humanity's darkest conflicts fired for the first time in centuries. The Keth defensive line lasted 20 minutes. Keth Mar watched from his throne as his empire crumbled. His admirals reported losses faster than he could process them. Human ships tore through his formations with contemptuous ease. They targeted command vessels and weapon platforms with precision that suggested they knew exactly where everything was. He realized too late that human intelligence had been studying his defenses for years. They knew every weakness, every blind spot, every vulnerability. This assault was not desperate or improvised. It was the execution of a plan that had been refined over decades. The Extinction Protocol facility was located on a moon orbiting the throne world. It was protected by the heaviest defenses the Dominion possessed. Ground-based cannons capable of destroying starships guarded its perimeter. Elite troops formed multiple defensive rings around the weapon itself. Nathan Cole led the assault personally. His dropship descended through a storm of defensive fire. Around him, veteran soldiers who had waited 3 centuries for this moment prepared for combat. Some of them were grandparents. Some of them had not held a weapon in decades. All of them moved with the deadly grace of predators finally released from their cages. The landing was rough. The outer defenses were formidable. The Keth troops fought with the desperation of soldiers defending their homeworld. It did not matter. The vanguard advanced through the facility with unstoppable momentum. They had trained for this kind of assault their entire lives. Every corridor, every defensive position, every counterattack was anticipated and neutralized before it could become effective. Nathan reached the control center where the Extinction Protocol was being prepared for launch. The weapon loomed above him, a massive structure of metal and energy designed to end worlds. Technicians scrambled to complete the firing sequence before the humans could stop them. Nathan raised his weapon. His first shot disabled the primary control console. His second destroyed the backup systems. His third and fourth eliminated the technicians who tried to resist. The Extinction Protocol went dark. The weapon that had threatened to destroy Earth would never fire. Outside, the battle was ending. The Keth fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants fleeing in every direction. The orbital defenses had been silenced. The throne world itself lay vulnerable before the human fleet. Nathan received a communication from Admiral Lane. She asked if the weapon had been neutralized. Nathan confirmed that it had. He asked what his orders were regarding the Keth throne world. Patricia was silent for a long moment. The temptation was obvious. The Keth had tried to destroy Earth. Justice would be served by destroying their homeworld in return. An eye for an eye. But that was not who humanity wanted to be. Patricia ordered Nathan to secure the throne world and prepare for ground forces to accept the Dominion's surrender. There would be no destruction. There would be no genocide. The Keth would face consequences for their actions, but those consequences would be delivered through law, not annihilation. Nathan acknowledged the order. He could hear the relief in Patricia's voice. They had won, and they had won without becoming what they had fought against. Supreme Overlord Kethmer was captured alive. He was brought before Nathan Cole in the same throne room where he had ordered the activation of the Extinction Protocol. The ancient tyrant looked at the human commander with something that might have been respect. Kethmer asked why they had not destroyed his world. They had the power. They had the justification. Why show mercy to an enemy who had shown none? Nathan considered the question. He told Kethmer that humanity had learned something important during their long history of conflict. Destruction was easy. Any species with enough weapons could destroy. Building something better was harder. It required restraint and wisdom, and the willingness to believe that even enemies could change. Humanity had chosen to be builders. That choice defined who they were. Kethmer was transported to stand trial before the Galactic Council. He would face justice for his crimes, but it would be the justice of law, not vengeance. The war was over. In the weeks that followed, the vanguard began to stand down. Ships returned to their hidden bases. Veterans returned to their families. The old soldiers who had answered Protocol Omega went back to being teachers and farmers and doctors. Nathan Cole returned to his academy on Mars. His students looked at him differently now. They had seen what he was capable of. They understood that the quiet old man who taught ancient battle formations was something far more than he appeared. Maya Torres received a promotion. Admiral Lane gave her command of a new vanguard unit, one designed for peacekeeping rather than warfare. The old generation had proven that humanity could fight. The new generation would prove that humanity preferred not to. The Galactic Council recorded a new entry in their historical archives. The entry described humanity's capabilities, their restraint, and the lesson they had taught the galaxy. It acknowledged that humans had chosen peace, not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to make that choice. The final line of the entry would be quoted for generations to come. Humanity's capacity for violence is exceeded only by their capacity for restraint. They chose to be farmers when they could have been conquerors. When darkness threatened, they remembered what they truly were. The stars trembled, and then, mercifully, humanity returned to peace. We hope they never need to remind us again. Nathan Cole read the entry on his personal screen. He smiled slightly, then turned it off and walked outside to watch the Martian sunset. The war was over. The stars had stopped trembling, but somewhere in the hidden places of human space, the vanguard remained ready. They would always remain ready. That was the promise they had made to themselves and to humanity. They hoped they would never be needed again. But if they were, humanity's elite were unleashed. The stars trembled once more. Part 4. The Price of Peace. The war entered its second month. Across 12 star systems, human forces pushed back the Keth invasion. Every battle ended the same way. The vanguard arrived, dismantled enemy formations with terrifying efficiency, and moved on to the next engagement. High Commander Vethkal had been relieved of his command after the disaster at Proxima. He had expected execution. Instead, the Supreme Overlord had summoned him to the throne world for a personal audience. Vethkal did not know if this was better or worse than death. Supreme Overlord Kethmer was ancient by any species standards. He had ruled the Dominion for over 400 years. He had personally overseen the conquest of 19 civilizations. His body was failing, sustained by machines and chemicals, but his mind remained sharp. He listened to Vethkal's report without interruption. When the High Commander finished speaking, Kethmer was silent for a long time. Finally, he asked a question that had been bothering him since the first reports arrived. Why had no one warned him about humanity? Vethkal had no answer. The intelligence reports had shown a peaceful species. Humans had no visible military. Their government spent more on art and education than on defense. Every indication suggested they would be easy prey. Kethmer dismissed his former commander with a wave. He understood now that the intelligence had been wrong. Not because it was inaccurate, but because it was incomplete. The humans had shown the galaxy only what they wanted the galaxy to see. If conventional warfare could not defeat them, other methods would be required. Nathan Cole received the news during a strategy session aboard the Quiet Resolve. A convoy of refugee ships had been traveling from the colony world of Haven's Rest to the safety of Earth. The convoy had contained 20,000 civilians, mostly families with children. They had surrendered when intercepted by a Keth patrol. The Keth had destroyed them anyway. The briefing room went silent. Nathan felt the weight of those 20,000 lives settle onto his shoulders. He had known this war would have costs. He had known that people would die. But this was something different. This was deliberate cruelty designed to provoke a response. Admiral Patricia Lane appeared on the communication screen. Her face was carefully controlled, but Nathan could see the fury burning behind her eyes. She informed him that Earth's government had authorized expanded rules of engagement. The vanguard was no longer required to offer surrender terms before attacking. Nathan acknowledged the order. He asked if there were any restrictions on his response. Patricia was silent for a moment. Then she said that the commander responsible for the convoy massacre had been identified. His name was Sub-Commander Kethval. He was currently leading a strike force near the Epsilon Eridani system. She suggested that Nathan make an example. The vanguard arrived in the Epsilon Eridani system 3 hours later. Ketfall's strike force consisted of 50 warships, a substantial force by any normal standard. They detected the human fleet and immediately formed a defensive formation. Nathan did not engage the fleet. Instead, he sent a single message to Ketfall's flagship. The message contained coordinates, a time, and a simple statement. The humans knew what he had done. They wanted to show him what happened to those who murdered civilians. Ketfall ignored the message. He assumed it was a bluff, a psychological tactic designed to frighten him. He ordered his fleet to maintain, position, and prepare for battle. The battle never came down at the exact time specified in the message. A single human ship appeared inside Ketfall's formation. Not near it, but inside it, in the space between vessels where nothing should have been able to travel. Before anyone could react, it fired a single shot. Ketfall's flagship exploded. The blast was contained, precise, surgical. The ships surrounding the flagship were untouched. Their crews watched in horror as their commander and his entire bridge staff vanished in an instant. The human ship disappeared before anyone could target it. Second message arrived moments later. It was addressed to every Keth vessel in the system. It explained that the humans had technology the Dominion had never seen. They could strike anywhere, at any time, without warning. The death of Ketfall was a demonstration. Any commander who targeted civilians would receive the same treatment. The Keth fleet withdrew from the system without firing a shot. They had witnessed something that violated everything they understood about space combat. The humans had not just defeated them. They had made them feel helpless. On Earth, Admiral Patricia Lane faced the Galactic Council. A dozen ambassadors had demanded an emergency session. They wanted to know about the technology used against Ketfall. They wanted assurances that humanity would not use it against other species. Patricia listened to their concerns. She acknowledged that the demonstration had been dramatic. She explained that it was necessary to establish clear consequences for war crimes. Ambassador Dex pressed the issue. He asked directly whether humanity possessed weapons that could bypass conventional defenses. He asked whether the peaceful species the Council had welcomed 3 centuries ago had been secretly developing technologies that could threaten galactic stability. Patricia considered her response carefully. She told the ambassadors that humanity had made many technological advances over the centuries. Some of those advances had military applications. Humans had chosen not to use them because they had chosen peace. That choice remained in effect, she assured them. When the Keth threat was eliminated, humanity would return to its peaceful existence. Their advanced technologies would go back into storage. Their veterans would return to their families. But until that day came, humanity would use whatever tools were necessary to protect itself. The Council had no legal grounds to object. Humanity was defending itself against an unprovoked invasion. Every action they had taken was within the bounds of galactic law. That did not make the ambassadors feel better. Nathan Cole stood in the medical bay of the Quiet Resolve. Chief Medical Officer Grace Kim was running standard diagnostics on him, checking for the cumulative stress the combat inflicted on the human body. Grace had served with Nathan during the last human conflict, 300 years ago. She had been a combat medic then, pulling wounded soldiers from battlefields that modern humans could not imagine. Now she was the best doctor in the fleet, responsible for keeping the old warriors alive long enough to finish what they had started. She told Nathan that his stress levels were elevated. His sleep patterns were disrupted. His body was showing signs of sustained psychological pressure. None of this was surprising. Nathan nodded. He asked how the rest of the crew was holding up. Grace sighed. She said that everyone was feeling the weight of the war. They had trained for this moment their entire lives, but training could only prepare you so much. The reality of combat was always harder than the simulation. Nathan understood. He remembered how it had been during the unification conflict. He remembered the faces of friends who had not survived. He remembered the nightmares that had taken years to fade. He asked Grace why she had returned. She could have stayed on Luna, continued her work at the hospital, lived out her remaining years in peace. Why had she answered the call? Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that she had become a doctor because she wanted to heal people. She had left the Vanguard because she was tired of causing harm. But some things were more important than personal peace. Some threats required people who knew how to stop them. She had skills that could save lives. Refusing to use them would be its own form of cowardice. Nathan thanked her. He said he was glad she was here. Grace smiled sadly. She told him to get some rest. The hardest part of the war was still coming. On the Keth throne world, Supreme Overlord Kethmer made a decision. Conventional forces had failed. Psychological warfare had failed. The humans were too skilled, too determined, and too technologically advanced. There was only one option remaining: the extinction. Protocol had been developed centuries ago. It was a planet-killing weapon, capable of destroying an entire world in a single strike. Every civilized species had banned such weapons. The Dominion had signed treaties promising never to use them. But Kethmer no longer cared about treaties. He no longer cared about conquest or tribute or vassals. The humans had humiliated his empire. They had killed his commanders with impunity. They had made the Dominion look weak. If the Keth could not rule the galaxy, they would ensure that humanity could not either. He gave the order to activate the Extinction Protocol. The target would be Earth itself. Humanity's elite were unleashed. The stars trembled once more. Part 3. First Contact. The Proxima system had always been a symbol of hope for humanity. It was the first star system beyond Earth that humans had colonized. The planet New Geneva orbited its dim red sun, home to 4 million people who had never known war. They were farmers and scientists and artists. They had grown up believing that the age of conflict was over. Now 800. Keth warships filled their sky. High Commander Vethkal stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue-green world below. He was a veteran of 30 conquest campaigns. He had personally overseen the subjugation of 6 species. He knew exactly how this would unfold. First, the humans would panic. They would send desperate messages begging for help. Then they would attempt to negotiate, offering anything to save themselves. Finally, they would surrender, and his troops would descend to claim another world for the Dominion. It was always the same. Every species reacted identically when faced with overwhelming force. Vethkal had stopped finding it interesting decades ago. His tactical officer reported a contact. A single human vessel had entered the system. It was broadcasting on an open channel, requesting communication with the Keth commander. Vethkal allowed himself a moment of amusement. One ship against 800. The humans were even more foolish than he had expected. He ordered his communication officer to open the channel. He wanted to hear what desperate plea this lone vessel would offer. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to an elderly human male. The human introduced himself as Commander Nathan Cole of the Vanguard. He said he was transmitting a formal warning to the Keth invasion fleet. Vethkal waited for the surrender terms. Instead, the human said something that made no sense. Nathan Cole told the Keth commander that humanity had given his species 300 years to become better. They had watched the Dominion grow and conquer. They had hoped the Keth would eventually learn to coexist peacefully with other species. That hope was now exhausted. School was in session. Vethkal cut the communication. He ordered his fleet to destroy the insolent human vessel. 800 ships turned their weapons toward a single target. Then the rest of the human fleet appeared. They came out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 200 ships arranged in a pattern that Vethkal did not recognize. They were still outnumbered 4-1. But something about their positioning made the High Commander uneasy. The battle began. Lieutenant Commander Derek Shaw sat at his tactical station aboard the Quiet Resolve. He was 34 years old, part of the new generation that was learning from the old. His hands moved across his console with trained precision as he coordinated weapons fire across the entire human fleet. The Keth used standard galactic tactics. They formed into attack wings and advanced in overlapping waves. It was an effective strategy against most enemies. It allowed them to concentrate firepower while protecting their flanks. Against the Vanguard, it was a fatal mistake. Nathan Cole watched the battle unfold on his holographic display. He could feel the psychic link connecting him to every ship in his fleet. He sensed their positions and movements as clearly as he felt his own heartbeat. 300 years of preparation had led to this moment. He gave a single mental command. The human fleet responded as one. Derek watched in amazement as the battle transformed. Human ships moved through the Keth formation like water flowing through gaps in a dam. They anticipated enemy maneuvers before they happened. They concentrated fire on command ships and supply vessels while ignoring the heavily armored warships dotted within 20 minutes. The Keth fleet had lost its coherence. Their communication network collapsed as command ships were systematically destroyed. Individual captains tried to coordinate their responses, but the humans were always 3 steps ahead. Maya Torres stood on the observation deck and witnessed her first real battle. She had trained in simulators. She had studied historical engagements. Nothing had prepared her for the reality. The Vanguard did not fight like the military forces she knew. They fought like predators who had been studying their prey for generations. Every movement was efficient. Every shot was precise. They wasted nothing. She understood now why the old veterans had seemed so calm during the journey here. They had known exactly how this battle would unfold. They had planned for it decades before the Keth even existed as a threat. Vethko watched his fleet disintegrate around him. He had never experienced anything like this. The humans were inside his formation, picking apart his command structure with surgical precision. His numerical advantage had become a liability. His ships were getting in each other's way, while the humans danced between them. He ordered a tactical withdrawal. The words tasted like poison in his mouth. His species had never retreated from a conquest. But he was not a fool. Continuing this battle would result in total annihilation. The surviving Keth ships jumped to faster-than-light travel. Of the 800 vessels that had entered the Proxima system, fewer than 300 escaped. The humans had not lost a single ship. Nathan Cole watched the enemy flee. He felt no satisfaction. This battle had been necessary, but it was not victory. The Keth Dominion had thousands more ships. This was only the beginning. On New Geneva, 4 million people watched the sky clear. They had seen the Keth Armada arrive. They had accepted that their world was lost. Then they had witnessed something that would become legend. Parents held their children and pointed upward. Elderly citizens wept with emotions they could not name. Young people who had grown up believing war was a thing of the past saw their assumptions shattered. Humanity had not forgotten how to fight. They had simply chosen not to. There was a difference. The Galactic Council received reports of the battle within hours. Their analysts reviewed the data repeatedly. They ran simulations trying to replicate the human tactics. They failed every time. Ambassador Thex read the reports with growing unease. He had dismissed Nathan Cole as a foolish old man. He had believed that Keth's terms were humanity's only option for survival. He had been wrong. The numbers were impossible to ignore. A human fleet, outnumbered 8-1, had achieved total victory in 4 hours. 0 losses against an enemy that had never been defeated. The Vanguard had not just won. They had demonstrated a level of military capability that exceeded anything in the Council's records. Next realized that for 300 years, humanity had been hiding its true nature. They had joined the peaceful civilization of the galaxy. They had disarmed their visible military. They had convinced everyone that humans were no longer warriors. It had all been a lie. The council called an emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species demanded answers. They wanted to know what else humanity had been hiding. They wanted to know if they were safe. Admiral Patricia Lane received their inquiries. She responded with a simple statement. Humanity had chosen peace because they valued life and cooperation. They had hidden their capabilities because they did not want other species to fear them. They had hoped they would never need to fight again. That hope had been betrayed by the Keth invasion. Now humanity would do what was necessary to protect itself and its allies. When the threat was eliminated, they would return to peace. The Council had nothing to fear from humanity, unless, of course, they gave humanity a reason to fear them. The message was received clearly. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy remembered why ancient species had whispered about humans with trembling voices. The stars had trembled once. They were trembling again. Humanity's elite were unleashed. The stars trembled once more. Part 1. The awakening call. The morning sun rose over the red dust of Mars as Nathan Cole stood before his class of young cadets. He was 52 years old now, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. His students looked at him with polite attention, but he knew what they really thought. They saw an old man teaching ancient history. They saw a relic from a time that no longer mattered. Nathan was explaining battle formations that humans had used 300 years ago. Back then, humanity had warriors called the Vanguard. They were the finest soldiers the galaxy had ever seen. But that was before the peace treaties. That was before humanity decided to put down its weapons and join the civilized species of the Galactic Council. Now, the Vanguard existed only in museums and history books. The few surviving members had become teachers, farmers, and shopkeepers. The galaxy had forgotten what they were capable of. Nathan sometimes wondered if he had forgotten too. On the other side of Mars, Lieutenant Maya Torres was running combat drills with her small unit. She was 28 years old, sharp and ambitious. She was one of the few active-duty Vanguard members left, though her role was mostly ceremonial. She guarded diplomats and attended formal events. She had never fired a weapon in actual combat. Maya had heard the old stories about the Vanguard. She had heard that they once made entire empires surrender without firing a shot. She had heard that alien species still whispered about human warriors with fear in their voices. But she did not believe these stories. They seemed like exaggerations designed to make old veterans feel important. Everything changed when the first distress call arrived. The Dominion of Keth had launched attacks on 12 human colony worlds simultaneously. The Keth were a warrior species from the outer rim of the galaxy. They had conquered 19 other species before humanity even learned to travel between stars. They were brutal, efficient, and utterly without mercy. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from 100 species argued and debated. Some wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to condemn the attacks with strong words. None of them wanted to fight. The Council's peacekeeping forces were designed for mediation and observation. They had no answer for a full-scale invasion. On Earth, Admiral Patricia Lane sat in her command center and listened to the chaos. She was 61 years old, the head of Earth's Defense Command. For 3 decades, she had maintained systems and protocols that everyone told her were unnecessary. She had kept ships in hidden dockyards when the budget committees wanted them scrapped. She had preserved training programs when politicians called them wasteful. Now she understood why she had done it. Patricia opened a secure channel that had not been used in 300 years. She entered a code that only 7 people in the entire human government knew existed. She activated Protocol Omega across human space. Old soldiers received the signal. Nathan Cole was in the middle of explaining a flanking maneuver when his personal communicator vibrated with a pattern he had not felt in decades. He stopped speaking. His hands, which had trembled slightly for years, suddenly became steady. His students watched with confusion as their elderly instructor's entire posture changed. The tired old man disappeared. Something else took his place. On a farming colony in the Tau Ceti system, a 70-year-old woman named Dorothy Wells put down her gardening tools. She walked into her house and opened a locked cabinet that her grandchildren had never seen inside. She pulled out armor that still fit perfectly. On a space station orbiting Jupiter, a retired pilot named George Santos kissed his husband goodbye. He did not explain where he was going. He did not need to. His husband had been married to a Vanguard veteran for 40 years. He knew what that signal meant. In a hospital on Luna, a doctor named Grace Kim excused herself from her rounds. She walked to a storage room that officially did not exist. Inside was everything she needed to become what she had been before she chose to heal. Instead of harm, thousands of men and women answered the call. They came from every corner of human space. They were teachers and farmers and doctors and engineers. They were grandparents and retirees and quiet neighbors who had never spoken about their past. They were the vanguard, and they had been waiting for this moment for 300 years. Maya Torres stood in the orbital dockyards above Mars and watched with disbelief. Ships that she had been told were museum pieces were powering up. Vessels that officially did not exist were emerging from hidden hangars. An entire fleet was assembling before her eyes. She saw Nathan Cole walk past her in full combat armor. He moved with a grace and purpose that seemed impossible for a man his age. He did not look at her. His attention was focused on something far away, something only he could see. Maya grabbed his arm. She demanded to know what was happening. Nathan paused. He looked at her with eyes that suddenly seemed much younger than the face that held them. He told her that for 300 years, humanity had chosen to be peaceful. They had joined the Galactic Council. They had disarmed their fleets and disbanded their armies. They had convinced the galaxy that humans were no longer warriors, but choice and capability were not the same thing. Nathan explained that the Vanguard never truly disbanded. They simply went to sleep. They lived quiet lives and raised families and pretended to be ordinary citizens. But they never stopped training. They never stopped preparing. They knew that someday, somewhere, something would threaten humanity again. That day had arrived. Maya asked what the Vanguard would do against an empire that had conquered 19 species. The Keth had thousands of ships and billions of soldiers. What could a few thousand elderly veterans accomplish against such overwhelming force? Nathan smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. He told Maya that she had never seen what humanity's elite looked like when they stopped pretending to be civilians. None of the younger generation had. For that matter, neither had the Keth. He said that was about to change. Admiral Patricia Lane appeared on every screen in the fleet. Her voice was calm and steady as she addressed the assembled vanguard. She told them that the galaxy had forgotten what humanity was capable of. The Keth believed they were attacking defenseless colonies. The Galactic Council believed humans had evolved beyond violence. They were all about to receive an education. The fleet began to move. Ships that had been dormant for centuries hummed with renewed purpose. Men and women who had spent decades hiding their true nature finally allowed themselves to remember who they really were. Maya Torres watched them go. She understood now that the stories she had dismissed were not exaggerations. If anything, they had understated the truth. She was looking at something ancient and terrible and magnificent. The Vanguard was awake. And the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. waiting to see what would happen when humanity's elite were finally unleashed once more. Humanity's elite were unleashed. The stars trembled once more. Part 2. The gathering storm Titan station floated in the shadow of Saturn's largest moon. For 3 centuries, it had appeared on no official maps. The Galactic Council believed it was an abandoned mining facility. The human government listed it as a decommissioned research outpost. Both were lies. Titan Station was humanity's hidden heart. It was the place where the Vanguard had preserved everything they were not supposed to have. Warships rested in massive hangars beneath the ice. Training facilities stretched for kilometers underground. Weapons that the peace treaties had banned were maintained in perfect condition by crews who had dedicated their lives to a war that might never come. Now that war had arrived. Nathan Cole stood on the command deck of his ship, the Quiet Resolve. He had been given command of the reformed 7th Vanguard Division. Around him, officers who had spent decades pretending to be civilians were resuming roles they had never truly abandoned. They moved with practiced efficiency, their bodies remembering what their minds had never allowed them to forget. Maya Torres had been assigned as Nathan's adjutant. Admiral Lane believed the young lieutenant needed to understand what she was witnessing. She needed to learn from the old generation before the old generation was gone. Maya spent her first day on Titan Station in a state of continuous shock. She watched men and women in their 60s and 70s train with a ferocity that put her own unit to shame. She saw grandmothers practicing hand-to-hand combat techniques that the modern military had classified as excessively brutal. She observed grandfathers maintain weapon systems that officially did not exist. Director Samuel Park summoned her to an intelligence briefing. He was 67 years old, thin and unassuming, with the appearance of a kind uncle who might offer you candy. Maya would later learn that he had personally assassinated 14 enemy commanders during the last human conflict. His specialty was making deaths look like accidents. Samuel spread holographic maps across the briefing table. He showed Maya the true scale of what they faced. The Dominion of Keth commanded a fleet of 4,000 warships. Their ground forces numbered in the billions. They had perfected the art of conquest over thousands of years. Every species they had encountered had eventually surrendered or been exterminated. Maya asked how he knew so much about the Keth. She pointed out that the Dominion had no diplomatic relations with any council species. They had appeared from beyond the rim only recently. Samuel smiled. He explained that Vanguard intelligence had never stopped operating. While the rest of humanity enjoyed peace, his people had been watching, listening, and preparing. They had agents embedded in a dozen hostile empires. They had accumulated data on every potential threat within 500 light years of Earth. The Keth were dangerous, Samuel admitted, but they were not unknown. They had weaknesses that could be exploited. Their command structure was rigid and hierarchical. Their tactics were effective but predictable. They relied on overwhelming force because they had never faced an enemy who could match them. They had never faced the Vanguard. Captain Linda Marsh joined the briefing. She was 45 years old, with short gray hair and a mechanical left arm that she had received during a training accident. She commanded the carrier vessel Silent Thunder, a ship so secret that even most Vanguard members had never heard of it. Linda reported that the fleet was nearly assembled. Ships were arriving from hidden bases across human space. Veterans who had not worn armor in decades were passing their physical certifications. The old warriors were remembering their training. Maya asked how this was possible. She pointed out that most of these people were elderly. Some were in their 70s or 80s. How could they possibly fight a war against a species in its prime? Nathan Cole answered her question. He explained that Vanguard training was not something you forgot. It was written into your muscles and your bones. It became part of how you breathed and moved and thought. A vanguard veteran might look old and slow. They might let themselves appear weak. But the moment combat began, decades of ingrained reflexes would take over. He also mentioned something that no alien species knew. Humans had developed psychic combat coordination during the unification conflict. It was a subtle ability, nothing like the dramatic powers described in fiction. But it allowed vanguard units to move in perfect synchronization without visible communication. They could share tactical awareness across an entire battlefield. They could anticipate each other's movements before they happened. The Galactic Council believed psychic abilities in humans were a myth. The Vanguard had worked very hard to maintain that belief. A communication request interrupted the briefing. A diplomatic shuttle from the Galactic Council was requesting permission to dock. They were sending a representative to discuss the situation. Admiral Lane approved the request. She wanted to hear what the Council had to say. The representative was a Mallory named Ambassador Dex. The Mallory were a peaceful species known for their skill at negotiation. Dex had personally resolved over 100 interspecies conflicts. He believed any problem could be solved through dialogue. Dex presented the Keth's terms. The Dominion was willing to accept a limited surrender. Humanity would give up the 12 attacked colonies. They would pay tribute to the Keth for a period of 50 years. They would accept vassal status within the Dominion's sphere of influence. In exchange, the Keth would halt their advance and spare Earth itself. Nathan Cole listened without expression. When Nex finished speaking, Nathan thanked him for delivering the message. He said he appreciated the Council's concern for peaceful resolution. Then he returned to planning the counterattack. Dex was confused. He asked if Nathan understood what he was rejecting. The Keth had never been defeated in war. Their fleet outnumbered humanity's known forces by at least 10 to 1. Resistance was not just futile. It was suicidal. Nathan nodded politely. He said he understood the ambassador's concerns. He also said that humanity would not be surrendering any colonies, paying any tribute, or accepting any form of vassal status. Dex demanded to know how Nathan expected to win against such overwhelming odds. Nathan looked at the Prestistas. Dex demanded to know how Nathan expected to win against such overwhelming odds. Nathan looked at the subversive overwhelming odds. Nathan looked at the Vajart of overwhelming guided ambassador with eyes that held 300 years of quiet preparation. He said that the Keth had made a mistake that every conquering empire eventually made. They had looked at humanity during peacetime and assumed that was all humanity could be. They were about to learn otherwise. The next morning, the Vanguard fleet departed Titan Station. 200 warships moved toward the Proxima system, where the first Keth armada had been detected. They were outnumbered 8 to 1. Maya Torres stood on the observation deck and watched Saturn grow smaller behind them. She thought about the ambassador's words. She thought about the impossible odds they faced. Then she looked at the men and women around her. She saw warriors who had waited 3 centuries for this moment. She saw determination in their eyes that no amount of enemy ships could diminish. For the first time, she began to believe that the old stories might actually be true.